So more and more people are contacting me about modifying airplanes. This is what this episode is all about. The 5 tips to modifying your private jet. As more and more people are coming into the private jet space, they're looking at buying an older aircraft and they're thinking, well, if I buy an older aircraft, can I modernize it? What can I do and what can't I do? Well, before we get into the 5 tips, the first thing you have to check is there an STC for that particular modification for that particular aircraft? What is an STC? STC stands for Supplemental Type Certificate. So basically the manufacturer, for example, has to authorize that that particular seat that you want to put in your airplane can be done. And if it can't be done, what you can do is you can invest some time and money into getting the STC made up and created for that particular modification. Now, it takes about a year. Sometimes it can take less. It's going to cost some money to do that. You have to liaise with the manufacturer and also with the FAA or your local civil aviation authority in order for them to be able to make that money. It's not like, buying a house and changing the kitchen. Every time something is changed in an airplane, whether you take a seat out or you put a seat in, it needs to be, the materials need to be approved, the airplane needs to be weighed again, and that's why a supplemental type certificate is required. But there are a lot of STCs being issued to modify aircraft. So the first thing you need to see is there an existing one for the modification I want to do? And if not, how much is it going to cost to do what I want to do? And is it even possible? So that's the first thing you need to look into. Now, let's look at first thing you can do to modify your airplane, which is what a lot of people are doing, is installing internet. Now, not all airplanes come with internet. And today we live in a connected world, so having internet on your airplane is almost a must. Even if you have a small Honda jet or a CJ2, or you're buying an older Citation or a Learjet, you've got an air ambulance company, you want to have internet connection on board your aircraft. Now, if you're operating within the United States, you can go for the GoGo option, which costs about $150,000, easy to install in a PC-12 or a CJ3, one of these smaller private jets. But if you're going to be buying a bigger aircraft and you're going to be flying to Hawaii or you're going to be flying to Europe from East Coast United States, you're going to need a SATCOM internet because that will work over the ocean. And that's really, really important. So the SATCOM works with a satellite, while the GoGo works with stations on the ground. That's the difference there. But the SATCOM costs around $700,000 to install on an airplane. So if you've spent $2 million to buy the plane, are you going to spend $700,000 for the internet? Is it worthwhile doing that? If you're going to buy an older jet that's going to cost you $2 to $3 million and you're going to modify it, this is an investment that you're going to make if you're going to keep the airplane for a certain amount of time. Otherwise, it's not going to pay off. So that's the other thing you've got to consider. The second thing that people are doing these days is modernizing the interior. So taking the whole interior out, putting a new interior in. Again, watch out for the STC. And you can check the video I did with JP Alfano. He's a great designer. I'll talk more about him towards the end of the video. The link is up here if you want to go straight to it right now. Otherwise, we'll put a link at the end of the video. Number 3 is upgrading avionics. And avionics is a big thing right now with air traffic control being modernized and that. Aircraft are being required to have ADS-B capability, so you need to check to see if your aircraft can do that. Others are going to be restricted to what altitude you can fly at. So you want to put modern avionics in your aircraft. And a lot of manufacturers now have issued STCs to put, like Garmin 5000 avionics in an older Citation XLS, that kind of thing. And that will, improve the situational awareness for the pilots, decrease the workload, make your flying a lot safer by having these modern avionics. So that's certainly a really good investment to do. The fourth thing you can do is put winglets on your airplane. Now, some airplanes have winglets. A lot of the new airplanes being manufactured already come with winglets, but you may buy an older plane that doesn't have winglets. There is an STC for winglets on that airplane, so have the winglets installed. What's the advantage of having the winglets? The winglets do a number of things. First of all, they decrease the fuel burn. That decreases your carbon footprint. That's always a good thing to do. It also increases range and it improves performance in general. So there's a great advantage to having winglets. Obviously, it does cost depending on what type of airplane you have. But again, if you're going to do a modification on an aircraft and you're thinking of going down that route, it's always a good idea to hire an aviation advisor like myself that can talk you through, first of all, figure out which is the best airplane, and then figure out what modifications can be done and cost everything out for you, and then even advise you on is it a good idea or a bad idea, depending on your needs and how long you want to keep the aircraft for. So that's all about the winglets. The next is new engines and landing gear. Now, engines, again, there needs to be an STC to put the new engines on. Engines can be very, very expensive. Sometimes the engines are more expensive. I mean, you may spend $2 million to buy an airplane, and then new engines cost you $2 million a piece. So it's a very, very big investment. So you've got to be careful if you're going to modify, put new engines on your aircraft. You've got to cost that in. The airlines do it all the time. They're always switching engines on their airplanes. But these airplanes do fly a lot. I mean, an airliner flies between 3,000 to 4,000 hours a year. Private jets usually fly about 200 hours a year, 200 to 300 hours a year. So that's certainly something that you need to look at. And if you're going to be flying a lot of hours on your private jet, you may want to look into putting new engines on it, or just buying a newer aircraft, because engines break down. Corrosion happens and all sorts of things. So engines are very, very critical on an aircraft. So that's certainly something to be considered, as well as the landing gear. Landing gears need to be overhauled every so many hours, every so many years. I know that Cessna have been doing overhaul on the Citation 10s, and that's been putting new engines on them and also new landing gear, completely refurbishing the aircraft. So that's certainly something that has to be looked at. Doing the landing gear can be a good investment, also because the landing gears on these private jets are not as robust as the ones on, for example, a Boeing 737. And so if you're going to be flying a high number of hours, which means a high number of landings, you may want to check the landing gear status, and you may want to change the landing gear sooner than later, because if you're going to be doing all those landings, you've got to have a landing gear that's going to be safe. And so that's really, really another important thing to look at is your landing gear. So just to recap, so first of all, make sure there's an STC for what you're going to be doing for your aircraft, the supplemental type certificate. First thing people do is the internet. So check, has it already got internet? What type of internet does it have? Has it got the right internet that I need for the flights I'm going to be doing? Second point is the interior. So what can you do with the interior? What new upgrades can you do? The seats, the carpet, the in-flight entertainment system. Then you've got the avionics. What can you do with the avionics? What type of avionics are already authorized to be put up front? What STCs are out there? What STC could you apply for that particular aeroplane? The winglets, does it have winglets or not? Can you install winglets on this airplane or not? Some airplanes you can't install winglets, so that's important to understand because of the aerodynamics of everything. So you've got to check that out. Do you really need winglets? That's another thing you want to look at. And then, of course, the new engines and the landing gear. How many hours do these engines have on them? The APU, which is another thing, the auxiliary power unit, and also the landing gear. When was that overhauled, and when is that overhaul due? So look at those factors as well, which is important. And the investment, as I said, on the engines is probably the most expensive. If you're going to put new engines on an aeroplane, you really have to think to yourself, how long am I going to keep this airplane for? Is it worthwhile buying an old airplane, putting engines on it, or is it best to go for a newer aircraft? And those are all things you need to think about. But I do encourage you, if you want, you can reach out. We can schedule a call and find out more and get specific. As I always say, here on BizJet TV, we can only give out general information. So we need to get specific with your case and find out, where you need to fly to, how many people you're going to be flying, to sort of figure out which is the best airplane, and then look at what modifications can be done and how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. Because that's another issue which is really important. When you're going to do these modifications, you can't just phone somebody up tomorrow morning and say, oh, I'm bringing my Citation CJ3 in and I want you into this, that, the other. Can you do it by Monday morning? Because these things take time. And the first thing you have to have, there has to be a slot available in the MRO where you're going to do this. MROs are very busy these days, so you have to find a reliable MRO that has a slot for your aeroplane. The second thing is, once you've got the scope of work that needs to be done, they need to order the spare parts. And because of all the geopolitical situation that's going on in the world today, between the Ukraine, Russia, China, lockdowns, backlog, you name it, it is taking a lot longer to get spare parts and to get parts or certain parts. So that's another thing that needs to be looked in. It's going to cost me $1 million to do all these modifications for my airplane. Let's get it done. And then you got to. I can get into the MRO down the road in 3 months' time. But are they going to have the spare parts for your airplane in 3 months' time? So that's another thing that needs to be considered when you're looking at buying an aircraft. It's not just, it's just going to cost me $2 million. Yeah, but then it needs $1 million of work done on it, And then the next thing is, can I get that work done soon or not? And how long is it going to take? Because you buy the airplane, if it's going to sit on the ground for 6 months to a year and you're not using it, and as I always say, remember, you're buying time, you're not buying an airplane. So you need to cost that in. You need to cost the time in as well. And that's really, really important. So I hope I've given you enough food for thought here on this episode of BizJet TV. Reach out to me if you want to get specific and you are serious about buying an aircraft. Let's get on a Zoom call and see what we can do for you here at OVL Aviation. And check this video I did with JP Alfano, all about interior designer aircraft. During the video, on the video, you'll see some footage of a modification he did on an Airbus. Great design. And, JP is half French, half Italian, so you couldn't get a better designer than being half French and half Italian. He does the big jets, he does the smaller jets as well. Very talented, very capable. He does yachts, so if you have a yacht, you may want to speak to him about the yacht. But check this video out I did with JP Alfano. And that's all from Fabrizio Polo in this episode of BizJet TV. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.